Welcome, everybody, to the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's Live Better series. I'm Rob Girth. I'm the Director of Digital Media here at the Foundation, and today we are talking wheelchair softball. And we're lucky enough to have almost a whole softball team full of experts here to talk with us today, and you're going to meet them in any minute now. But first, a little housekeeping. We're going to do some question and answer at the end, and you can use the chat feature to do that, or we're actually going to allow you to call in. So if you want to call in and ask a question live to our guests, that is excellent. And we have our operator, Matt, here to give you the details of that. Matt?
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, during the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Afterwards, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. At that time, if you have a question over the phone, please press the 1 followed by the 4 on your telephone keypad. If you'd like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. If you need to reach an operator, please press *0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Wednesday, May 15th, 2013. I would now like to turn the call back over to Rob Girth.
Thank you very much. And now here is our host for today. He is Dan Humphreys. He is BlazeSports Director of Training, Education, and Certification. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Rob, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Access to Sport webinar series. And I want to thank the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation for giving us this opportunity to share some great sports with you. And today we are going to talk about wheelchair softball. And as you can see from my short bio, my expertise is in wheelchair basketball, so we got a couple of great presenters for you today, Bruce Froendt and Brent Rasmussen. And they have a long history with wheelchair softball, and I'm going to turn it over to them to tell you a little bit about themselves and then present wheelchair softball to you. So with that, I will turn it over to Bruce.
Well, thanks a lot, Dan. Bruce Froendt. I'm currently the National Wheelchair Softball Association Commissioner. I've been in that position for about the last 5 or 6 years. Previous to that, I was president of the organization. So from an executive director or management standpoint, I've kind of been running the organization or helped do so since 2005. I also play various other athletic endeavors, rugby and handbike, and I've raced and done other things. So lots of wheelchair sports, but softball is my passion and my love, and I've really involved myself. Look forward to presenting to you today all the information about wheelchair softball. I've also been involved with small business. I've run a couple small businesses in my past, and I'm also currently the president of the All Play Foundation here in Omaha. And about 5 years ago, we raised $1.5 million and built a complex that includes a wheelchair softball field, a miracle baseball field for children with disabilities, as well as a water park playground, concession stand, covered areas, parking, and that's where the center of activity in Omaha that we use to play wheelchair softball at. And with that said, I have recruited an expert speaker and presenter. Well, I'm going to go to another slide here and tell you a little bit more about myself, I guess. I saw that they snuck one in here. A little bit about myself. I was injured when I was 23 years old. Prior to that, I played all the athletics that I could in a smaller high school here in Nebraska, and that included baseball and football and basketball and track and golf, and just loved athletics. But in 1984, when I was 23 years old, I dove into the shallow end of a swim pool by accident and broke my neck. So I'm a C6-7 quadriplegic, and that sent me on the world of disabled athletics. I never really had experienced it prior to that, but after that particular incident, I wanted to continue the love that I had for athletics, so I explored some opportunities and avenues and immediately immersed myself in wheelchair racing. Got a track chair. They held the national championships in Houston in '86, and I saw that, so I got a chair, started training every day, and was fortunate enough 2 years later to make the Paralympic team that went to Seoul, Korea. So I had some pretty good success in doing that. I did win a bronze medal in Seoul, Korea at the Paralympics in '98, and then I continued in 2000 and won a silver medal at the World Championships in Austin, the Netherlands. Continued my racing for about 6 or 7 years, made the alternate list for a couple of the Paralympics, but never the primary one again. And about '95, my racing career started to kind of edge out. About that time, I discovered wheelchair softball and involved myself in wheelchair softball in 1998. In about 2002, I kind of took the team over from a management and coaching standpoint And since that time, we found some incredible players here in a small town. You know, Omaha is only 500,000 or 600,000 people. And we put together a team that is pretty incredible, that has won 7 out of the last 10 national championships. We compete against big city teams across the country, and we're pretty proud of what we're able to do in a small town. And we'll be telling you about that here in the webinar. My accomplishments include induction into the Hall of Fame for the National Wheelchair Softball Association here just this last year. And again, you can see that I'm the founder of the All Play Foundation, which I currently spend a significant amount of time organizing. We have 240 disabled children playing baseball every Saturday on 20 teams for 15 weeks. So it's a effort of love and also an effort. So that's what I spend a lot of my time on right now. I'm also a husband, father, and grandfather, which takes my time. But again, wheelchair sports is why we're here today, and wheelchair softball is the name of the game. And for that, we have a presenter that will tell you a little bit about himself, Brent Rasmussen.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm Brent Rasmussen, and I play wheelchair softball and many other disabled sports as well. But I am also here in Omaha, Nebraska. But I'll give you a little history about me and tell you how I found wheelchair softball and a little bit why I enjoy it and why it's important in my life and why it's been going on with me for 10 years. But I grew up playing a lot of sports and was pretty athletic as a child, where I made the high school varsity team, won a state baseball championship, went on to college, and was captain of our college team for 2 years at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And shortly after that, I was lucky enough to get picked up as a free agent with the Kansas City Royals and played in the Gulf Coast Royals League down there for them in Florida. Had a great experience, but wasn't all I wanted to do in life, so I came back and finished my degree in 2001 at UNO and graduated. Found the mortgage business at the time, and in February of 2002, I stopped to help a stranded motorist along the interstate and got hit by a vehicle at about 55 miles an hour, which amputated my left leg and also fractured my right femur. So you'll see in the next couple pictures here that a little bit of my accident. But today we're going to share a little bit about wheelchair softball and what got me involved in wheelchair softball as well. So here's some pictures of me playing and as an able-bodied individual, and also with the Kansas City Royals. Had a great experience and playing at a high level, and a little of my accident pictures shortly of me being amputated. So it was a major struggle. I was very athletic and walking my dog and having a normal life that's a normal able-bodied individual's life of doing all the things you want to do, playing softball regularly, playing baseball, pickup games, going running. And next thing I know, from one day traveling home from a work event, stopping at the interstate, you can see the pictures on this slide, at mile marker 422. And got out of my vehicle there by the state patrols in the bottom left-hand corner and walked down to that red vehicle, and that's when about 30 seconds later another vehicle had slid off the interstate and hit me. You'll see the mile marker there of 422, and it has a major resemblance in my life because my date of birth actually is April 22nd, 1977. So after seeing some of these accident pictures, I knew that this was an accident that was put in front of me for greater challenges to show myself what I could do and also maybe to others what I can do. Bruce has a major impact in my life in that he was helping to get the Nebraska Barons off the ground and reached out in a phone call to me and said, "Hey, have you ever heard of wheelchair softball?" And I said, "Never heard of wheelchair softball," and said, "Well, why don't you try out and come down to practice with us, just meeting some of the guys and seeing what we get a chance to do." And I said, "No, I'm not really interested. I've never been around disabled individuals, and wheelchair and softball doesn't sound like anything I'd be excited about because I've played at high levels and it can't be that extensive and that great of a sport in that what I've been used to." And Bruce got me down to play, and they got me in a wheelchair very reluctantly to even sit down, even try out with these guys about a year and a half after my accident. And got a chance to see the guys, and I was, like I said, very hesitant on doing anything and just seen a lot of wheelchairs and a lot of different disabilities and never been around that many types of disabilities and individuals and peoples before. And really kind of opened my eyes and first scared me because it made me realize now I'm 100% disabled and this is what I'm left with is playing wheelchair softball. I got down and played and made it to a few practices and eventually made it to my first tournament. They kept after me and kept me going. I think the biggest thing that got me to keep playing was they invited me to go to the bar. And it's a funny story because I enjoy the bar, but I really got a chance to get to know the guys when they all sat down behind a table and the wheelchairs got away. And I was able to talk to them and find out their family. They all had families, they all had kids, they all had jobs and careers, and they were athletes once just like I was in high school and college. And it really opened my eyes to say, hey, let's try this, let's get active again, because I always enjoyed playing sports and being competitive, and that's what I did. So my very first tournament after playing for about 3 or 4 weeks, I found myself up in Chicago. And Chicago it's a permanent wheelchair softball field, and when I got there and saw how big the field was and how nice it was and painted out like a regular field, it showed me that there's many other people out across the country that are doing this. And I had a great tournament, and you can see in the middle of this slide that I found myself in Sports Illustrated for Faces in the Crowd for a very high batting average, intentional walks, doubles, and home runs. And some of the guys around the league had told me that, you're an up-and-coming player. We need to have you around. And Nebraska Barons had already told me that this is something that we could make a national stage at. Thanks to Bruce and many other guys, they lined me in a wheelchair. They showed me how to play as quick as possible. I had the fundamentals of hitting and throwing baseball, but never understood how to play in a sports chair and getting around. And it was probably the first start of me and my rehab ability, just to getting around another team again of other athletes that had been through some of the same types of accidents that I have been in. And it was a very open opportunity for those guys to get me going, get me playing, and be among a different team and or family that I had all growing up and playing all different kinds of sports. I've been playing with the Nebraska Barons now for 10 years, and we've won 7 out of the last 10 national championships. I've won many different MVPs, all tournament awards, other credentials I could go on with, but I really am most impressed with what I've done with the sport and the fact of when I came around and playing wheelchair softball 10 years ago, there was only about 4 home runs ever hit over the fence in wheelchair softball history. My first tournament, I hit 3 over the fence in Chicago and have hit many of home runs since. But this last couple tournaments, we've seen over 10 different athletes hit the ball over the fence now. It's really opened up the game to be more of a power game and changed the game to seeing it from a different angle, which has been a very open, exposed to all different disabilities and awareness as well. So as you can see, a little bit of all of the teams that I've played with, there's some of the national championships that we won. And you can see through the years that it's more of a family. We all get together. We all go out after games, tournaments, travel across the country, and all are friends and have a great time just getting a chance to get together and be competitive and exercise and working out, but also just to get friends and give each other harassment. And I think that's one of the things I enjoyed the most about our team is we get out there, and if somebody's having a bad day, we get on their case a little bit to make them laugh and have fun, where we had that in college, and these guys are the same bunch of guys I played with all through high school and college. So a little bit after that, I got involved through wheelchair softball. Some other disabled athletes that we play against had exposed me to wheelchair softball, and was not aware of what sitting volleyball was. And I got a chance to try out for the U.S. team, and actually made a team in 2003. And within a year of first starting to play wheelchair softball, I found myself in Argentina and winning a gold medal that qualified us for the Athens 2004 Paralympic Games. I've been the captain of the U.S. men's sitting volleyball team and represent the United States for now 10 years. And it's been an amazing experience to see the world and in different eyes, but also to represent the U.S., not just putting on a Nebraska Barons jersey because we play here and represent Nebraska, but now I get to represent the entire United States of America and traveling all over the world and playing volleyball at a high level. I won't go a lot into sitting volleyball, but you can check out more of that. It's being a Paralympic sport, which has allowed me to stay very active in preparing for wheelchair softball and vice versa with both sports and keeping my arm swing and arm in shape for both activities. A little bit about me as well, too. I continue on as an athlete, but also continue on as a disabled individual to run a business that I own of mortgage specialist as a mortgage broker here. I have a son that's Drew that's 5 years old, and he doesn't look at me much different with a prosthetic leg and getting around and asks me to do the same things that any other kid would want you to do. So as a disabled athlete, I really have found wheelchair softball being a necessity for me. It's been very blessed that I had guys here locally that called me up to come play, to once again have another form and outlet to compete in and to stay in shape, but to also have another fun time of family and representation of a big group. So it's a little bit about my story and who I am, and open up to any questions at the end here. But I'll turn it back over to Bruce to explain a little bit more of wheelchair softball rules and the play of the game.
Well, thanks a lot, Brent. And we're going to tell you all how you can get involved, or who can play this game. You don't have to use a wheelchair every day to play wheelchair softball. Brent is an example of that. He only uses a wheelchair once a week when he comes down to play wheelchair softball, and the rest of the time he is ambulatory, using his prosthetic to get around. So there are disabilities like amputation, maybe like spinal bifida, maybe like multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy, where again people are crutching or walking or their gait may be impaired. Nonetheless, they don't have to use a wheelchair every day, but for the sport they have to use a wheelchair. And the wheelchair allows them a freedom and a speed and a maneuverability and an ability to compete at a high level of intensity. So the wheelchair is a requirement to play, but you don't have to use one each day. You do have to have a permanent lower extremity impairment that precludes you essentially from playing competitive stand-up athletics. If people have knee or joint replacements, that may qualify them. If they have, again, some sort of trauma injury, whether it's a spinal cord injury or birth defect, all the various disability types would and or could qualify them to play wheelchair softball, wheelchair basketball, and a variety of other wheelchair-based sports. There is a classification requirement we'll talk about that will qualify you or not, but essentially if you have some sort of mobility impairment, some sort of issue that causes you to have to, with a gait or with a crutch or in some way ambulate not as a normal able-bodied person, but with some sort of assistance, that may indeed qualify you for wheelchair sports and wheelchair softball. Wheelchair softball is very much like all the other disabled sports. In an effort to even the playing field, there is a classification system that's used. And the classification system aims to minimize the impact and the impairment that the outcome could have if you were to allow the highest or the least disabled individuals to all get together and play on a team. It also creates a sense or an environment of fairness and inclusion. Wheelchair softball is a unique sport that includes a variety of disability levels as well as gender. In wheelchair softball, women can play on the teams with the men. Youth can play on the teams with adults. Amputees play on teams with quadriplegics and paraplegics and those that have various birth defects. So wheelchair softball is truly all-inclusive. And you'll see that in the makeup of the teams, and the classification system serves to promote that. There are different points awarded to different players or different individuals based on their ability and or disability. The classification system ensures that competitive success is determined by strategy, skills, and talent of the athletes and teams, and not the ability to recruit some super team of individuals with very little disability and maximum talents. National Wheelchair Softball Association uses the same classification system that the National Wheelchair Basketball Association uses. It also uses one very similar to Wheelchair Sports USA. It also utilizes the United States Quad Rugby Association classification system. So we piggyback off of many of the other systems that have been developed to classify the athletes that play in the game. And if you are classified by one of those other organizations, very common is the acceptance of that classification for wheelchair softball. A 1.0 is the lowest function, and that would include individuals of quadriplegic injury as well as paraplegic injury that have their vertebrae injuries from the T1 to T5 level. It also includes individuals who functionally would perform at those types of abilities that may have muscular dystrophy, post-polio, just a variety of other birth defects that may indeed impair the ability for their hands or arms to fully realize strength and or function or flexibility. 3.0 is the highest. and that is the classification of amputation, usually a single leg amputation, or maybe even a double leg if it's low enough. It may include spinal cord injuries at the T12 level or L level or lower. And again, going back into the various birth defects, they too can be classed out as a 3.0 type of player. And then in the middle you have, again, spinal cord injuries from the T5 level to the T12 level, and all the various birth defects that, again, from a functional ability standpoint, would qualify in that little pocket. So in wheelchair softball then, we take a mixture of players and we say on a team you can play with 22 points. And on a typical softball team, that would include about 4 individuals who have lower leg amputation or some sort of minimal disability from a standpoint of their abilities to catch and throw and use full strength in all the endeavors of turning and spinning and playing the game. Usually about 4 of those individuals, 4 to 5, play on a 10-person team. There's the requirement to have 1 quadriplegic on each team. So each team that tries to compete for the national championship each year has to have a quadriplegic playing on the field at all times. And then the other players, again, comprise the remaining points, and they can be a mixture of Classification 2 and Classification 1 players, all to fit within the 22-point guideline. Women who want to play the game, it's been recognized, again, abilities and strengths and other things, so we look at their classification that's been given to them either by NWSA or by the other sports authorities, and they play at 1 point less. So in wheelchair softball, if a woman who plays basketball comes to play, if she has a 3.0 classification system in wheelchair basketball, in wheelchair softball she would play as a Class 2. So again, wheelchair softball does have a unique feature of inclusion. And again, the inclusion of quadriplegics, youth, adults, both male and female, make it a very inclusionary sport. And it does take 10 to play on the field. Usually teams are comprised of 12 to 18, 19 players. And again, anybody can play and everybody's encouraged. You cannot use power chairs in the game. You have to be able to propel your chair with your hands. There has been some challenges in the past with single leg amputees with arm amputations and the ability to push a manual chair. But very much like wheelchair basketball, the feet must stay up on the foot platform of the chair and the arms are used to propel. We do have some one-armed athletes that use axle drive chairs so they can play the game, but you have to be able to propel a manual chair to participate in the game. Rules of the sport. We'll start with what the fields look like, and hopefully you can see on this particular slide a wheelchair softball field. Now, if you didn't know that and you just saw the picture, you might think it's pretty much like a regular softball field. You might even think that's grass or AstroTurf. This field is actually asphalt that's painted like a tennis court. So the colors are simulated to simulate the dirt and grass feel and look of a regular softball field. But it is indeed on a hard surface, generally asphalt or concrete. And the reason for that is to give the athletes the ability to maximize their competitive abilities in a wheelchair. And those of you who have to push a wheelchair, if you ever compete on a softer surface or you try to push through grass or other types of surfaces, you can't compete or do the best you can because that surface impedes your abilities. So wheelchair softball is generally played on parking lots. It is a 50-foot base path, so it's kind of like slow pitch softball. Some slow pitches at 60 feet and 75, but we play at 50-foot bases. The outfield fences are between 150 and 220 feet. So again, a little bit shorter than some of the softball fields you might see in your local area softball complexes, but there's a reason for that based on some of the equipment we use. There are something called restraining lines on these fields, and the restraining lines are for a competitive balance reason. A restraining line is a line that says you cannot go ahead of or behind this line until after the ball is pitched. And so I'll give you an example of a restraining line. In this picture, you can see the dirt simulation here at home plate as it goes down to first base and around second and around third. Well, that dirt line is precisely measured to simulate a restraining line. So the back side of the dirt is approximately 70 feet away from home plate, And the infield players, the defensive players, must be inside of that particular dirt outline before a pitch is made and during a pitch. And what was happening in wheelchair softball years ago is that the outfield and infield were all coming in and just making a huge chain across the field, particularly for the less able hitters. So the quadriplegics that might try to hit, or the class 1s who don't have the strength to propel the ball as far, were routinely getting out because defensively the teams could create a type of structure that wouldn't allow the ball to get through. It was kind of non-competitive. So restraining lines are used for both out and infield. In the outfield, there's a line that's 100 foot, and the outfielders have to stay behind that. So when the pitch is made, you truly do have infield players and outfield players, and you'll see restraining lines on wheelchair softball fields or when you see wheelchair softball games. The bases are painted on the ground. Of course, there's not bases that are above the ground. They're painted on the ground. Wheelchair softball uses circles. You know, the width of the wheelbase of chairs can be 3 feet for some athletes. You know, some athletes that are bigger, it may even be bigger than that. You know, from the wheel to the wheel as you measure across, maybe 3 to 4 feet. Wheelchair softball uses a regular home plate, but out in the field, the first base and second base and third base are all based on a 4-foot circle. At first and third, there's only half of the circle because the line cuts the base in half. At second base, you'll see a 4-foot in diameter circle. And again, that allows the runner and the base, the defense, room, again, to make plays on the bases. It allows for the width of the chairs. It wouldn't be possible to play the game if the base was only 17 inches like in normal baseball because, again, the equipment we used, i.e. the wheelchairs, they're just too big. And essentially defensive players could block the whole base. They could sit right on top of the base and not allow an offensive player to get there. So we use a 4-foot base, and you'll see that as you look at different fields. There are approximately 10 to 15 dedicated wheelchair softball fields now in the United States, and that's a wonderful surprise. The game really started taking off in the late 90s, and the first field built was in Chicago in about 2001 to 2002. The Rehab Institute of Chicago with the Chicago Cubs raised about $300,000 and built the first field, the first dedicated field that is recognized today. Now, there was a field down in Pasadena, Texas, and they did put one in '96, and it had some lights, and I guess that might be actually the first field. But the Chicago one is what is more modernly recognized, and with it was the painted surfaces and all the accoutrements, and that's the one that Brent was referring to that he first traveled to and really got his enthusiasm back to play a game that he loved so much and thought that maybe he had lost with the amputations that he had. But you can see the field that we have here in Omaha. There are fields in Columbus, Ohio. There are fields in the East Coast, in Boston. There is a new field that went in Minnesota. There's a new field down in the Topeka area. So again, these fields have arisen, and they've replaced the need for these athletes that play wheelchair softball to practice on parking lots or practice on irreparable, pothole-laden, light pole-laden facilities that don't allow the athletes, again, to perfect their athletic abilities. So these fields are really, really welcome. But many teams still practice on patches of asphalt or patches of cement that allow them, to prepare for the tournaments that are played. And we host our national tournaments on these fields that you see like this. But look around the field on our website. We have, and we'll give you the website at the end of the call. You'll be able to see the different fields that exist and locations of those fields if you have an interest. ASA softball is the primary basis for the rule set that's used for National Wheelchair Softball Association. There is a set of rules in the American Softball Association's book that specifically is for 16-inch softballs. The game was developed primarily and is thriving in the Chicago area. They call it a mash ball or a mush ball sometimes. It's played throughout the Midwest largely, but the National Wheelchair Softball Association adopted those rules because the ball that is used we can catch without having to use a glove. The ball is big enough so that when it is hit by the most gifted athletes like Brent and others, the defense can field the ball at shortstop or at third base or even at the pitcher's mound without having to use a glove. But it's also hard enough when it's hit, it can fly. And so individuals who have abilities can fly the ball over the fences if they have that ability, or there can be doubles and triples hit because, again, the ball still has enough integrity to it to fly properly. So there are some modifications that we make to the AFA rules because they didn't anticipate wheelchairs. So again, we have 10 players per team just like in regular ASA softball. But instead of running or using foot references, we have our wheels touch the bases. So one of your 4 primary wheels are essentially your feet, and those wheels are what's used to determine whether a runner crosses a base or whether a fielder touches a base to make an out. You have to keep your rear end in the seat when you're hitting, fielding, and throwing in wheelchair softball, meaning you can't stand up in your chair to do catching or throwing or hitting, so you have to sit down. Your feet cannot touch the ground during play. So while the play is in action, and not unlike wheelchair basketball, your feet have to be up on the platform. And that's why, again, if individuals have an arm amputation, they can still play using single drive chairs or single drive axle chairs, but they're unable, again, to use their feet to propel their chair. A 16-inch Chicago-style softball is used. They cost about $10 a ball. And again, only manual wheelchairs are allowed. The primary equipment, other than a wheelchair, which we'll talk about here shortly, is the bats you can see in the middle. The bats that are used in this game are a little bit heavier than a normal bat. In regular ASA softball, you'll see bats that may be 34 inches long, but they may only be 25 ounces or 26 ounces for bat speed. And the ball that's used in regular ASA softball weighs several ounces less than the ball we use. On this slide, you can see the ball that's used at the National Wheelchair Softball Association. That's the 16-inch De Beer clincher softball. I believe it weighs about 9 ounces. I'm not quite certain of that. Costs about $10, but you can see what it looks like, and it is pretty much the full size of your hand. If you were to open your hand up and lay this softball on it, you would not close your fingers down around it. The ball would keep your fingers open. It's a pretty big ball. And lastly, there's something called the batter's rack. And the batter's rack is kind of an innovation that was made up in Minnesota by an individual to hold the chairs still while in the batter's box while a batter is swinging. For years, the individuals that played wheelchair softball used 2x4s, rubber stoppers, car bump, anything to try to hold their chair still, because while the pitch is made and an individual swings a heavy bat, the chair can move. And not like tennis where you have a big racket to use to try to hit a ball, you have to try to hit this ball with a pipe, with a bat. And so the chair generally needs to stay still. And this rack is used, and the players will back their chair into the rack. There's a gap made in the middle of the rack to allow wheelie bars to pass through the gap. There are other accommodations or other types of secure systems made for sports chairs that have 2 wheelie bars, but this is a batter's rack for a 1 wheelie bar. And the rear wheels will sit in between these two, the front and back of the rack, and after the batter swings, this rack will, again, hold the batter's chair still while he's swinging, and then he'll push off the front of the rack, and the big rear tires roll right over the front, and the batter can go to first base. So this is what's used primarily by most of the batters. There are still some. This rack is not required. So some batters will still sit in the batter's box without the use of a rack. And if you ever watch them, their chairs will be moving while they're swinging their bat, because the bats used in NWSA weigh 30 ounces, 32 ounces, 34 ounces. There's even some 36-ounce bats that are used. So as that bat is swung, the chairs will move. And you'll see some athletes that will not use a rack. They'll stay steady and try to swing. Others will get in the batter's box and push their chair into the ball and try to hit the ball while their chair is moving forward to create some momentum and speed. But the batter's rack is something that as teams get going, we highly recommend that they utilize or look into in a way to improve their performance. The other pieces of equipment we'll talk about are the types of wheelchairs. And these slides were borrowed or used from a presentation similar to the one we're hearing today with the National Wheelchair Basketball Association. The chairs that are recommended or used are lightweight athletic chairs. There are different types of chairs you can buy from different manufacturers. This particular one here is adjustable. And up here in Nebraska, we have an organization called the Eastern Nebraska Wheelchair Athletic Association. Much like it's a nonprofit that helps promote wheelchair sports in our city. And they go out and write grants and receive grant money, and they purchase chairs for use by adults and juniors in different athletics. And so wheelchair softball uses chairs very similar to wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis. I'm trying to think some of the Paralympic sports that don't require like track and field or rugby specialty chairs. Again, just a general purpose athletic chair. So again, these sort of chairs are adjustable. You can adjust width of seat. You can adjust height of the seat. You can adjust the axle forward and backward to create the right center of gravity so athletes aren't tippy or tipping over. The backrest can be adjusted up or down depending on disability level and classification. Again, some individuals may only be able to push with one arm, so they may have a single drive axle that goes through their whole chair. So there are chairs that can be bought and or used that can be adjusted specifically to an athlete's ability. And these program chairs, we may call them, may be available for an athlete to use by a local charity, a local a rehab unit, organization, and allows individuals to get a sense of what type of chair is good for them and what type of setup is good for them. After they maybe use an adjustable chair, then they might move to a rigid chair, which the real benefit to that is it is a chair made specifically for the athlete. Their width and height and abilities and disabilities are all incorporated into the actual design of the chair, and the axles are fixed and everything is fixed, and that is the lightest, most maximum performance tool that can be used by an athlete to play an athletic sport. So the adjustable chairs have a little bit more weight but offer the variety and ability to adjust, grow with athletes. Sometimes they're used for youth. As they grow, they can be adjusted. But once somebody gets pretty well set on what kind of chair or their size from a physical standpoint and their abilities, then they move to a rigid custom fit chair. And both of these chairs can be purchased from a variety of manufacturers, and they range in price from $2,000 to $3,500. I imagine you can spend more if you're using titanium. And again, the more elite the athlete, the more they may spend on equipment. So again, the variety, just like any other chair that may be used for rugby or racing, again, they can all be customized and people can spend more on wheels and et cetera. But again, it doesn't take an extraordinarily expensive chair to play wheelchair softball. Generally, a general athletic chair with camber can be used, and camber is the kind of the slant of the wheels on a chair. And the cambers can vary, again, depending on the athlete's abilities. So again, just a general purpose wheelchair can be used. General purpose athletic wheelchair can be used. This is showing the anti-tip bars. Basketball, a lot of basketball players are going to the double anti-tip casters because of their weight shifts and all the moving they're doing. In wheelchair softball, again, we're seeing both. We still have a lot of single anti-tip. And again, the height can be adjusted based on the center of gravity needs by the athletes in the chair, but these are just pictures of the types of anti-tip bars. And strapping is important. Again, strapping is key in making the chair move for you and not allow you to move in the chair. If in any athletic endeavor you want to perform at your highest level, you don't want to try to make a move and move inside of your chair, degrading your ability to, again, athletically make the type of play or move that you want to make. In wheelchair racing, if an individual is moving inside of the bucket of their chair, that energy is being lost instead of being transferred into the wheels through propulsion. In wheelchair basketball, if an individual tries to reach for a ball and their hips change in their chair, they may be able to get the ball, but then they have to readjust again to propel. So strapping is like this, and they've come up with some neat strappings and clicks. This allows a person to secure themselves as much as they need to be secured in their chair. So again, they can perform at their maximum level, not only before a play, during a play, but after a play. Because in softball, after you swing a bat and hit the ball, you have to push your chair at full speed to first base. If you moved in your chair while swinging, you have to adjust to get going. So again, strapping allows you to, again, achieve maximum performance in your equipment. Brent, would you, if you're still there, would you want to come in and talk about the next slide here in regards to benefits? I think that, again, you spoke to it in your presentation, but you know, in 2002, when that happened to you, as you were finding your way and discovering the disability, tell us a little bit more about the benefits that wheelchair softball and disabled sports can bring to individuals.
For sure, yeah. I mean, many of the people that we play with and all different have different disabilities, and all have received their disabilities in many different ways. You know, me as a child growing up, being, you know, the supposed jock or athlete, you know, wasn't exposed to a lot of individuals with disabilities. And I guess as a childhood, you know, you always think, oh, somebody's pushing a wheelchair, they must have did something themselves, or they have some sickness or whatever. And finding out and playing with these guys on my team, but also meeting athletes and disabilities of different individuals across the country, you find out very similar accidents happen to them, whether they got hit by a train or whether they got electrocuted, you know, and their legs were amputated that way, or many kids receive bone cancer as children and become amputated. None of us are prepared ever for any kind of amputation. As 24 years old, when I got hit by a vehicle, you know, it was totally out of the blue, totally unexpected. There's no preparation saying, hey, you're going to be losing your legs here next week. We're going to amputate them. It's all of a sudden and you wake up in a hospital and you find out, you know, you have this new disability you're forced to deal with. And that's been the greatest thing that I've enjoyed, besides being competitive again and being fit and staying in shape, is getting to know other athletes across the country and knowing them personally, but also, you know, what they've had to overcome. And it gives you an understanding that everything is going to be okay. Some of these athletes have been playing wheelchair softball for 20 years, some playing for a year or two, but you get to meet people all over the country, here locally, and know that you're not the only person out there with this disability, and your life's not going to end just because you may be missing a leg, or you become paralyzed, or you're quadriplegic, or, you know, you have some kind of birth defect you're born with, or something of that nature. It really allowed me to, you know, get in front of people, feel confident again about, you know, you may be walking around with 2 prosthetic legs or a leg, and people are looking at you differently or funny, or kids are asking you, you know, why do you get around with that, you know, robot leg, or why do you push that wheelchair to get around? And you can explain to them what happened to you. You can talk with them. You can feel confident that, hey, there's other people out there in the world that are just like me. And really, you know, once we get out there in the field, if a lot of you get a chance to watch wheelchair softball, on the field it's super competitive, and, you know, we're pretty much rivals and enemies. Off the field, everybody gets along and hangs out and, you know, get a chance to catch up when the game's over, and get to be friends and just understand that what they've gone through and what you've gone through is many of the similar same type of things, and it makes you a stronger person at the end of the day. You know, as the slide talks about is, you know, a lot of friends and challenges. You get opportunities to see a lot of the cities of, you know, Chicago and Minneapolis and, you know, New York and some of these larger places you might not have a chance regularly to get to. But also, you know, the mental side of the world, it allows you to cope with certain things. When I started playing, you know, I was a year and a half into my accident. I got a chance to see what kind of prosthetic legs other guys use and their wheelchairs they use to get around, and it really educated on me on how to get around better with my disability as well, too. So a lot of it could be mental with the sportsmanship. It teaches you, you know, how to get along with other people as well, too, that you might never have been exposed to, even if you weren't an athlete prior to playing. You know, I can probably honestly say, you know, just as many as half of people that are playing wheelchair softball or disabled sports might not have grown up playing any kind of sports or any kind of team atmosphere because of their disability, and not exposed or not even aware this type of atmosphere is out there, where at least it teaches you sportsmanship and confidence, and in a team atmosphere how to accomplish something as a whole. So hopefully that takes care of it a little bit there, Bruce.
Thanks a lot. And, you know, sometimes individuals or people that encounter a disability, some trauma that causes a disability, or maybe even through a, you know, a birth defect or some other long-term, they can become a little isolated. Their family, and they have a support system that is pretty neat. But it's really something different when you can get with individuals who have common experiences like yours, maybe not life experiences, but regarding disability. Whether it's a trauma from a spinal cord injury or whether it's an amputation, when you start to get around individuals who are going through like and similar things, be it the ability to fit a prosthetic or hold one on, or the cost of, or where to get the best, the collaboration, the camaraderie, the understanding, the sharing life experiences can be really neat and can be really helpful in helping you deal with your day-to-day challenges with a disability. It's interesting at wheelchair softball games we have individuals who will come up to watch the tournaments, and there'll be a leg sitting up against a tent post, and there'll be all sorts of body parts essentially that have been taken off and strung around the field, and people go, I've never really thought of that. They're seeing wheelchair athletes perform at a high level, and over here by the tent is body parts that those individuals lost that are not being used in the game, and they go, wow, this is really something different. If you look at the types of benefits you can get from just physical activity, and that's another thing that with a disability, sometimes it's hard to do the things you need to do to extend your life and to live a healthy life and get your heart rate up and do all the things that you're supposed to do if you don't have a disability. But in a wheelchair or with a crutch or brace or prosthetic, it can be harder. So again, wheelchair softball brings agility, strength, and endurance, lower body fat, more energy, circulation. The things that you do each day can be easier when you do athletics. And again, the secondary health risks, whether pressure sores or circulatory or whatever they might be, are diminished through wheelchair sports and disabled sports. There's no one magic thing. The one thing about wheelchair softball, it's not an overly aerobic activity, but the preparation and training to play the game at its highest level is. It's difficult to show up once a week to a practice and play for a few hours and get a lot of health benefits from that. But if you want to be the best you can be the other 6 days that you're not doing that, you're preparing to use that as a stage to show how well you are conditioned or how well you can condition yourself and prepare to play the game. The last few slides we have here, just a little bit about NWSA. We've been around about 36, 37 years now, organized in 1976. We have about 400 to 500 members that play the game. We call them members, but players. Comprised in 3 different divisions: adult division, a varsity division, which are basically our high schoolers, maybe 9th through 12th grade, and junior varsity. The 30 teams are broken out. We have about 20 active adult teams. There's probably, and those, when I call them active adult, they're practicing usually weekly throughout the summer. They're attending various regional or local tournaments, and or they may be competing against local fire departments or doing whatever. But throughout the summer they're practicing, and of those 20 we have 16, between 14 and 18 that attend our national tournament. There's probably another 10 to 15 or 20 that don't compete against other teams, but they may just practice throughout the summer and play different scrimmages and play different local organizations to create awareness and have fun and get all the wonderful benefits of wheelchair athletics, but they don't travel as a team and can play against other teams that are located nationally. Junior varsity, we have about varsity and junior varsity, a division that we just started about 5 years ago. We have about 5 varsity teams and about 4 or 5 junior varsity teams, and generally they're logically associated with some adult team that's organized. This year, the adult national wheelchair softball tournament is going to be in Chicago, Illinois, August 22nd through 24th. And both the varsity and junior varsity national championships are going to be held out in Baltimore, Maryland. And they're going to be held August 3rd. I believe it's August 3rd and 4th. It's a Friday and Saturday. If you want to learn more about the National Wheelchair Softball Association, here's a slide with information. This information can be derived or obtained from the website we have, and that website is www.wheelchairsoftball.org. On that particular site, you can find videos of games being played. You can find teams that are located throughout the country, both active and more passive. You can find contacts for junior teams. You can get names and information for individuals who run our organization. You can see the complete history of our organization, the individuals who have played in the Hall of Fame. You can see national tournament results, just a whole host of information. But if you want to see the game played, there are links there where you can see on YouTube actual full games played. There are also different promotional videos that have been shot by different organizations that create a nice, exciting snippet. So please visit our site if you'd like to learn more. I want to show the composite picture. This is of our national tournament in in New York City in 2010. And as Brett alluded, these tournaments are held throughout the country locally, and regional teams will compete on weekend tournaments. We'll drive to Chicago here from Omaha, and the Minnesota team will do so. And so throughout the summer, the season starts about the middle of June, and teams will play tournaments throughout the end of June and through July. And then in the early to middle part of August, we'll have a national tournament. So the season's only about 12 weeks long and pretty compressed. And this was a collage of all the athletes at the national. You can still see there's games going on the field, but this is a good sampling of the participants in the 2010 National Championship Tournament that was held in New York City. So with that said, I don't know for sure who I refer this moderation back to, if it's Dan. If you want to take over, whoever it is, I'll sit back and we'll answer questions.
Well, thank you, Brent and Bruce. And this is the time to call in if you have any questions. And the number for that call-in is 800-931-1309. That's 800-931-1309. And we'll see if anyone is brave enough to call in with a question. While we're waiting for that, I had one for actually both of you. Brent, you had talked about how until you got involved that first year, very few home runs had actually cleared the fence. And then when you came up and hit a few, that really led to the onslaught of people hitting home runs. And I wondered, I kind of thought of the 4-minute mile barrier when you were talking about that it went forever without anyone able to break the 4-minute mile barrier. But then as soon as it was done in the next year, about a dozen people broke it. Do you think when you did that, do you think people changed what they were doing to allow them to hit home runs, or they just realized that, hey, this is something that's possible and I can do it?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think a lot of them never realized it could happen on a consistent basis, but I think a lot of it was my disability is a very a minimal disability considering other athletes that play in the sport, where I'm only amputated through the middle of my ankle. So it's called a Symes amputation. And with that amputation, I have most of my abdominal and my legs to be able to use to turn into a baseball and hit it farther, where other individuals that might be paralyzed are strapped in their wheelchair, and they don't have the physical ability, unfortunately, to be able to swing like I do, where, and Bruce spoke of earlier, we can no longer stand in wheelchairs and play the sport that way. That used to be allowed. I used to be able to stand in the wheelchair, throw the ball across the field. That was allowed until we just changed the rule this last year. And that when I hit a ball, I sit on the edge of the wheelchair and use majority of more of my body. And I think a lot of the other athletes then saw, okay, this is how it can be done to use more of my athletic ability to those individuals to be able to hit the ball harder, which then allows the ball to travel farther, which could then be over the fence. So I think it's a little bit of both, a little bit of, first of all, the athletic ability that I grew up playing millions of hours of baseball and really to a high level, and then transferring that over into the wheelchair. They saw that, okay, here's how we can adapt our swing to be able to hit the ball over the fence.
And Dan, I'd like to add to that. I think that, again, in the last 10 to 20 years, the abilities of wheelchair athletes have really elevated. You can look at times in the Paralympics. You can look at wheelchair basketball performance. And part of it is that the individuals who encounter disabilities decide they can play the game. And then they see someone like Brent who can do what he can do, and they start to mirror and mimic. So we have bigger, faster, stronger individuals. Brent was one of those individuals that came in that kind of showed that path. And due to that, we have individuals that, again, are pushing the limits to records that have been previously held. And that's true in any sport, and that's happening here in wheelchair softball also.
And I think that's one of the great things about it and doing webinars like this, because you never know who you're going to touch to get involved in the sport that might revolutionize it in some area. So hopefully someone's out there listening that'll be the next Brent Rasmussen. We had a good question earlier, and apparently the person answering the question isn't going to call in. But the question was, it says Nebraska is the westernmost team in wheelchair softball. How can more teams get included from the western U.S.?
Well, Nebraska, there was a team in Colorado, a very, very strong organization in Colorado for quite some time. We found that the West Coast, and there are some organizations out in the West Coast that are promoting wheelchair softball. They play a game out there called Between the Lines. So it is possible, and they can be included. Part of the problem is the organization kind of bloomed, and it's fostered in the Midwest. And only recently, in the last 5 to 10 years, has the sport picked up really significantly on the East Coast. We have a team down in Tampa, Florida, but then closest to that are the teams down in Atlanta and through the Carolinas. And now we have some teams up east. And prior to that, those teams had a hard time playing during the year. They could practice, but they couldn't play each other. And we're starting to get a better saturation of teams, so they too can drive to weekend tournaments and play like we do in the Midwest. Out on the West, the same thing. We have to try to identify wheelchair basketball teams and organizations. We have to identify rehabilitation centers and paralyzed veterans administration centers and veterans hospitals to try to get the sport added to the portfolio of activities so that it too can become involved and be another option for a disabled athlete to pursue. And once that happens, and let's say up and down the East Coast through California and Oregon, Seattle, if that can develop, again, those teams can drive and play against each other and form a West Coast division. But essentially it's incumbent upon NWSA to try to recruit and educate those organizations about, again, the complementary nature of wheelchair basketball to all the other sports that exist. And the timing of the sport, it being from basically May or June through August, and the ease in which it is to put a team together and, again, provide the education, provide equipment, whatever it may be to, again, help those teams form so they can become part of our organization.
And I think part of that definitely is if you're one of those programs on the West Coast, definitely communicate with Bruce and the NWSA so they know all those different programs that are interested on the West Coast so they can help be that resource to connect you with each other, because if you're trying to do it on your own, something might get lost and fall through the cracks. But if you communicate with the NWSA, then they can keep a tab of everyone that's interested and help connect you with each other. We're almost out of time, but we've got another question, and I know you'd mentioned this earlier, but the question is there any point that a power wheelchair could be allowed in recreational games, and is there any way that could evolve as an option for people who just simply can't push the manual chair?
It is a good question, and it's one which we've discussed. And without a doubt, depending on the local organization, a power chair could be used in recreational activities, in practices or competition against local teams. But at the national organization level, we've intentionally decided, again, very much like wheelchair basketball, not to allow power chairs because of the variability that they create, I won't call it flexibility, but the maneuverability, the weight, the other issues. In wheelchair softball, regularly in any game watched, you'll see collisions. Yeah. There will be runners that are moving around the bases into fielders who are catching the ball or on the base paths, or most commonly a catcher blocking the home plate. And there are collisions that occur. And the power chairs, which weigh several hundred pounds in addition to the individual, we have decided, again, to consciously not allow that at this time. But it's something we continually evaluate because we want to include all that we can. I know the junior division one year, again, allowed a few individuals or children to play or kids to play. But our national rules right now do not allow it. And it's an issue that we revisit on occasion. And maybe someday that will be allowed.
Well, and I think it's also important to remind everyone that when you're developing your local program, you can make any adaptations you want. It's just when you want to play within league play that's not allowed. So a local program can meet their local needs and then just have to adjust as they move up and get into more regional and national competition. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let's see. I'm just trying to think. We're right at that 5 o'clock hour. I had one more question for you, Bruce, because some people that are out there might have a similar disability to you, and I think it's important, coming from a person that's a quad. Could you just take a minute and explain about the different positions and the roles quads play playing wheelchair softball? Because we might have some people out there thinking, well, it sounds great, I'm able to play, but what am I really going to do? So could you just give them a little personal glimpse into how much effect you actually do have on the field and the different positions you've played?
Well, sure. The quad has the most impact. Is that right, Brent?
Yeah, it does.
No, for quadriplegics, I guess the greatest thing ever invented was quad rugby. It gave quads a sport that they wouldn't be excluded from, and actually they were the only ones that could play. 10 years ago, I tried playing wheelchair basketball, and as a C6-7 quad, the inability to get my hands above my head regularly and throw the weight of a basketball up didn't allow me to play. And given the rule set in wheelchair basketball, as a level 1 or a 1 point, I couldn't compete against the paraplegics who, again, had full arms and full hands.
Sure.
But in wheelchair softball, I was pleasantly surprised to find the requirement that a quad play. So every team that wants to play at the national level, and again, weekend tournaments, local, again, they don't necessarily have to, but I encourage them, obviously, to recruit the quadriplegics. Quadriplegics can find a role on every team, and generally the quadriplegic is the catcher on the field. Sometimes we've had quadriplegics that are maybe a C8, if people know what that is. They may have more function of their hands, more balance. They may play a position like a third base or a second base or maybe even pitch. But generally quadriplegics play catcher, and they receive the ball from the pitcher, return it back to the pitcher. A lot of times they may be involved in plays at home plate where they have to try to catch the ball and tag somebody, or sometimes they back away and let an able-bodied pitcher, or not able-bodied, but a higher classification player come in and cover the plate. Quadriplegics back up positions, be it first and third base for overthrows to keep the ball back in play. And as hitters, the strength and ability of a quadriplegic to hold a bat in their hand shouldn't prevent them from trying to play the game, because many of the quadriplegics will use some sort of handle on the bat to help secure the bat in the hand a little bit, or find another mechanism to bunt the ball. Quadriplegics are allowed only to bunt the ball, as the other classifications are not. So there is a role, and although a quadriplegic may not hit a home run or hit a ball out to the outfield and advance runners, the quadriplegic can, again, at bat, can move runners to bases and sacrifice properly. They can, again, make significant plays and contribute to the game. But as an all-inclusionary measure and an intentional goal of NWSA to include people, the provision was made to include quadriplegics. So I very much appreciate the ability to play the game because of that rule, and we right now have that rule as a requirement. So those out there that have quadriplegic-like injuries or disabilities, wheelchair softball, there's a place for you.
Excellent. And I did put the contact information back up. We had a couple other questions come in there. I put that contact information up for Bruce so you could email him and ask those questions directly, because we are 4 minutes over and we want to respect everyone's time. On behalf of Blaze Sports, I would like to thank you all for joining. And Brent, Bruce, thank you so much for your time and putting together this great presentation. And as a person who loves baseball and loves wheelchair softball, I'm so glad that you were able to do this, and I'm hoping we get some more people participating in and enjoying the sport. And with that, Rob, I will turn it back over to you for some housekeeping and some cleanup.
Excellent. Wonderful job, guys. I appreciate it. It was fascinating. I loved every second of it. ChristopherReeve.org/sports, and you can continue this conversation. ChristopherReeve.org/webcasts, and you can watch this all over again sometime tomorrow when I get it posted, just so you know those two things. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this, and stay tuned. We're doing these on most Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Blaze Sports will be back soon to do another one for us. So thank you all.
Yep, just wanted to say, Rob, we should be back in June with Power Soccer.
Oh, excellent. I love soccer. Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you again,
guys.
Rob. Thanks, Brent. Thanks, Bruce. Thank you to everyone that attended.
Ladies and